Hold on tight, because what I'm about to tell you today has an ending so surprising that even the editors get goosebumps. But before I begin, I need to be 100% honest. YouTube does not deliver the ending of this story to people who aren't subscribed. Without subscribing, you get stuck halfway, without understanding the why behind everything. So don't risk missing the best moment. Click subscribe, hit the like button, and comment your city. We want to know how far this story will travel. If you're about to read this story, let me tell you something. What you're about to discover will shake you to your core. This is not just another love story. This is a tale of desperation, danger, forbidden passion, and a twist so unbelievable that you won't see it coming until the very last moment. Before we begin, I strongly urge you to subscribe to our channel right now. This story has an ending that will leave you breathless, and you won't want to miss the other incredible, thrilling stories we have waiting for you. Trust me, you'll want to be part of this journey. Hit that subscribe button now, and let's dive into a world where love and danger collide in the most unexpected ways. The rain hammered against the tall windows of the Grandview Hotel in downtown Chicago, each drop a bullet of water against the glass, creating a symphony of chaos that matched the storm raging inside Amelia's chest. She stood in the opulent lobby, her hands trembling as they clutched a small leather bag, the only possession she'd managed to grab before fleeing her penthouse prison on Lakeshore Drive. Her dark hair, usually styled in perfect waves, hung in damp tendrils around her pale face. Her brown eyes, wide with terror, darted from corner to corner, searching for any sign of him. Of them. Of the people who would drag her back to a life worse than death. She wore an expensive silk dress, now wrinkled and rain-soaked, that clung to her slender frame. To any observer, she might have looked like a wealthy woman caught in a storm. But to someone with a keen eye, someone who knew how to read people, who understood the subtle language of fear and desperation, Amelia was an open book of terror. And in the far corner of that marble-floored lobby, sipping a glass of bourbon at the hotel bar, was exactly such a person. Alexander Reed sat with the casual confidence of a man who owned half of downtown Chicago. At 35, he was one of the most successful corporate attorneys in the Midwest, known for his ruthless courtroom tactics and his ability to dismantle opponents with surgical precision. His dark suit was tailored to perfection, his silver watch caught the light as he lifted his glass, and his piercing blue eyes missed nothing. Especially not the terrified young woman who had just stumbled through the hotel's revolving doors like a hunted animal seeking sanctuary. He watched her approach the front desk, watched the way her shoulders hunched forward as if trying to make herself smaller, invisible. He saw her glance toward the entrance every few seconds, saw the way her hands shook as she tried to pull out her wallet. Alexander had spent 15 years reading people in courtrooms, depositions, and high-stakes negotiations. This woman was running from something, or someone, and whatever it was bad. The desk clerk, a young man with a practiced smile, was speaking to her. Even from across the lobby, Alexander could see the conversation wasn't going well. The clerk shook his head. Amelia's shoulders slumped. She said something else, more urgent now, her voice rising just enough for Alexander to catch the edge of desperation in it. The clerk shook his head again, this time pointing to his computer screen and spreading his hands in a gesture of helplessness. No rooms available. Alexander saw the exact moment hope died in her eyes. She swayed slightly, as if the news had been a physical blow. Her hand reached out to steady herself against the marble counter. And then, as Alexander knew she would, she turned toward the entrance, toward the rain, toward whatever nightmare waited for her out there. He was moving before he'd consciously decided to intervene. Years of courtroom instincts had taught him to trust his gut, and right now, his gut was screaming that this woman needed help, that something was very, very wrong, and that if he let her walk back out into that storm, something terrible would happen. "Excuse me," Alexander said, his deep voice cutting through the ambient noise of the lobby. Emilia spun around, her eyes wide with alarm, and he immediately raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I couldn't help but overhear. You need a room." Up close, he could see the full extent of her fear. Her pupils were dilated, her breathing shallow and rapid. There was a fresh bruise on her left wrist, barely visible beneath a gold bracelet. Her lips were pressed together so tightly they'd gone white. This wasn't just fear, this was terror. Yes, but they don't have any available," Emilia said, her voice barely above a whisper. She had a slight accent, he noticed. German, maybe? Her eyes flicked past him to the entrance again. "I should go. I'm sorry to have bothered." "I have a suite," Alexander interrupted, the words coming out before he'd fully thought them through. "2 bedrooms. You can have one." Emilia stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. What? No, I couldn't possibly." "You're in trouble," Alexander said quietly, stepping slightly closer and lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I can see it. I'm a lawyer. I've spent my career reading people, and right now, everything about you is screaming that you're running from something dangerous." He paused, letting that sink in. "I'm offering you a safe place to stay, no strings attached, just a room where you can lock the door and breathe for a few hours. Don't miss a thing. Subscribe now and discover the ending of this and other thrilling and dramatic stories." Emilia's eyes filled with tears. For a long moment she simply stared at him, and Alexander could see the war being fought behind those brown eyes. Trust versus survival, hope versus cynicism. Finally, she whispered, "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "Call it a lawyer's instinct," Alexander replied. "Or call it the fact that I can't stand by and watch someone in trouble when I have the means to help." He extended his hand. "Alexander Reed, corporate attorney, suite 2847. 2 bedrooms, like I said. You take one, I'll take the other. In the morning, if you want to leave, you leave. If you want to talk, we talk. But right now, you need to get off this lobby floor before whoever you're running from comes through that door." The mention of someone coming through the door made Emilia glance frantically at the entrance again. Alexander saw her entire body tense, saw her make a decision born of desperation rather than trust. She took his hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "Emilia," she said simply. "My name is Emilia." "All right, Emilia, let's get you upstairs." The elevator ride to the 28th floor was silent, except for the soft mechanical hum of the ascending car. Alexander stood on one side, giving Emilia space, while she huddled in the opposite corner, her bag clutched to her chest like a shield. He didn't push for conversation. He simply stood there, solid and calm, a presence that radiated safety and control. It was a technique he'd perfected in his years as a lawyer, the ability to project absolute confidence and competence. People in crisis needed someone who appeared unshakable, and Alexander had built his entire career on being exactly that person. When they reached the suite, Alexander unlocked the door and gestured for Emilia to enter first. The room was everything one would expect from a luxury Chicago hotel, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the city skyline, elegant furniture in shades of cream and gold, a full kitchen, and 2 separate bedroom suites, each with its own bathroom. It was the kind of space that cost $3,000 a night, and Alexander kept it on a permanent reservation for when his cases required late nights downtown. "The bedroom on the left is yours," Alexander said, closing and locking the main door behind them. He noticed how Emilia's eyes tracked his every movement, how she positioned herself near the windows, an escape route, he realized. She was calculating exits. "There's a lock on the door. Use it. The bathroom is fully stocked. If you need anything, clothes, food, whatever, just let me know." Emilia nodded slowly, still not quite believing this was happening. "I don't understand why you're doing this." Alexander moved to the bar area and poured himself another bourbon, then looked at her thoughtfully. "Have you ever seen something that you knew was wrong, and you had the power to make it right, but doing so would complicate your life, and you had to choose between the easy path and the right path. Yes, Amelia whispered. I choose the right path, Alexander said simply, even when it's complicated, especially when it's complicated. He raised his glass slightly. Get some rest, Amelia. You're safe here. I promise you that. Amelia's eyes searched his face for any sign of deception, any hint of ulterior motive. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she finally nodded and moved toward the bedroom he'd indicated. At the doorway, she turned back. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You have no idea what this means. After she'd closed and locked her bedroom door, Alexander stood at the windows, looking out at the Chicago skyline, his reflection ghosting in the glass. Rain continued to pound the city, and somewhere out there, someone was looking for Amelia. He could feel it in his bones. And he'd just put himself directly in their path. He smiled grimly. Let them come. What Alexander didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that the choice he'd just made would unravel secrets he'd spent years trying to bury, would drag him back into a darkness he'd fought to escape, and would force him to confront the real reason he'd been drawn to help a stranger in distress. Because Alexander Reed wasn't just a successful lawyer with a hero complex. He was a man running from his own demons. And Amelia was about to become the catalyst that would make him face them all. In her locked bedroom, Amelia sat on the edge of the massive bed, her body finally beginning to process the events of the past 6 hours. 6 hours since she'd made her decision. 6 hours since she'd looked into the eyes of Victor Zimmerman, the man her father had chosen for her to marry, and realized that if she went through with the wedding tomorrow, she would never leave that marriage alive. Victor was the son of her father's business partner, man who ran what everyone politely called an import-export business, but was really a sophisticated money laundering operation that stretched from Berlin to Chicago to Singapore. Amelia had known her father's business wasn't entirely legitimate. You didn't grow up in the Zimmerman household without learning to see the signs, to read between the lines of whispered conversations and sudden arrivals of dangerous-looking men. But she'd convinced herself that her father, Daniel, loved her enough to never truly put her in danger. She'd been wrong. Victor was a monster disguised as a gentleman. Handsome, charming in public, with impeccable manners and an Oxford education that made him seem refined and cultured. But Amelia had seen the real Victor. She'd seen him strike a waitress who'd spilled wine on his jacket, had watched him systematically humiliate his assistant until the man was in tears, had witnessed the cold calculation in his eyes when he looked at her, as if she were a possession, to be acquired, a trophy to display and control. The final straw had come that afternoon, during what was supposed to be their final pre-wedding meeting. They'd been alone in her father's study, reviewing the marriage contract, a literal contract, as if their union were a business merger, which, she supposed, it was. Victor had smiled at her, that charming public smile, and said, "You understand, of course, that once we're married you'll need to be more obedient. Your father has been too lenient with you. That will change." "Excuse me," Amelia had said, certain she'd misheard. Victor's smile had turned cold. "Your father is in debt to my family. Significant debt. This marriage settles that debt. In return, you become mine, my wife, my property. You'll do as I say when I say it, without question." He'd reached out and grabbed her wrist, the same wrist that now bore a bracelet-covered bruise, and squeezed until she gasped. "Your father understands the arrangement. It's time you understood it too." In that moment, Amelia had seen her future. Years of control, abuse, isolation. Victor would use the marriage to bend her father to his will, and she would be the leverage. She would become a prisoner in a gilded cage, and eventually, when she was no longer useful or became too problematic, she would disappear. It happened to women in their world all the time. Tragic accidents, sudden illnesses, unexplained disappearances. No one ever asked too many questions. So she'd done the only thing she could think of. She'd waited until Victor left. Then she'd grabbed her bag, thrown in whatever she could reach, and run. She'd left her phone. They could track her through it. She'd left her credit cards. They'd see every transaction. She'd taken only the cash from her emergency fund and a few pieces of jewelry she could sell if necessary. And she'd run, with no plan beyond getting as far from her father's house as possible. The Grandview Hotel had been the first place she'd thought of. Her father had brought her there once for a business dinner, and she remembered thinking how beautiful it was, how safe the thick walls and security had seemed. She'd thought she could hide there, just for a night, while she figured out her next move. But the universe had other plans. The hotel was fully booked. She'd been standing there, feeling hope die inside her, when Alexander Reed had appeared like some kind of guardian angel sent by fate, or a devil offering a different kind of bargain, a small voice in her head whispered. How do you know you can trust him? But Amelia was exhausted, terrified, and out of options. And something about Alexander, the way he'd looked at her with those intelligent blue eyes, the way he'd kept his distance, given her space, treated her like a person rather than an object, had made her take the leap of faith. Now, sitting in this luxurious bedroom with the door locked and the sound of rain against the windows, Amelia allowed herself to feel everything she'd been holding back. The tears came in great, racking sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for the life she'd lost, for the father who'd betrayed her, for the future that had been stolen from her before she'd even had a chance to live it. She cried until she had no tears left. And then finally, she fell asleep on top of the covers, still wearing her damp dress, her bag clutched to her chest. In the main room, Alexander heard her sobs through the door. He stood there for a long moment, every instinct telling him to knock, to offer comfort. But he didn't. She needed privacy. She needed to feel safe in her space. So instead, he went to his own bedroom, changed into comfortable clothes, and pulled out his laptop. He'd told Amelia he was a corporate attorney, which was true. What he hadn't told her was that his specialty was fighting exactly the kind of people he suspected she was running from. Wealthy criminals who used legitimate businesses as fronts, who manipulated the legal system to avoid consequences, who preyed on the vulnerable. Alexander had built his career taking apart their operations, finding the cracks in their armor, exposing them to the light of scrutiny and justice. He'd become an expert at it for a very specific reason. But that was a story for another time. For now, he opened his laptop and began to search. He didn't have much to go on, just a first name and the obvious signs of wealth and breeding. But Alexander had resources most people didn't. He had access to databases, connections with law enforcement, relationships with private investigators. If Amelia was connected to any major criminal organization, he'd find the trail. It took him less than an hour to find Daniel Zimmerman. The man ran an import-export business based in Chicago with international connections. The company had been investigated multiple times by federal authorities for money laundering, racketeering, and fraud, but charges had never stuck. Too many good lawyers, too many convenient witnesses who changed their stories or disappeared, too much political influence bought with dirty money. And Daniel Zimmerman had a daughter. Amelia Zimmerman, aged 26, educated at private schools and Northwestern University, generally kept out of the public eye. There were a few society page photos, charity galas, fundraisers, that sort of thing. In every photo, she wore the same carefully neutral expression, the smile that didn't reach her eyes. And in every photo, there was a man hovering near her, usually the same man, Victor Zimmerman, Daniel's nephew, 20 years older than Amelia. Alexander felt his stomach turn. He dug deeper, pulling up everything he could find on Victor. The man had money, power, and a reputation as a ruthless businessman who'd expanded the Zimmerman family operations into territories even Daniel had been reluctant to touch. Victor had been married once before. His wife had died in a car accident 5 years ago. The Fiao. Circumstances were suspicious. The car had gone off a bridge in the middle of the night, and the wife had been found with a blood alcohol level that suggested she'd been drinking heavily. But her friends and family insisted she never drank. The investigation had been closed quickly, too quickly. Alexander sat back in his chair, pieces clicking into place. This wasn't just a young woman running from an unwanted marriage. This was a young woman running for her life from a man who'd possibly murdered his first wife and was connected to an organization that made people disappear. And Alexander had just made himself her protector. He should have felt concerned, worried, maybe even frightened. These were not people to be trifled with. They had resources, connections, and a complete lack of moral boundaries. By helping Amelia, Alexander had just painted a target on his own back. But as he closed his laptop and looked out at the Chicago skyline, all he felt was a familiar burning in his chest. The same burning he'd felt years ago when he'd first decided to use his legal skills to take down the powerful who abused the powerless. The same burning that had driven him to become one of the best attorneys in the country at dismantling criminal empires. Some people would call it a savior complex. Some would say he had a death wish. But Alexander knew what it really was. It was the need to make things right in a world that so often let evil win, because no one wanted to take the risk. Make the sacrifice, pay the price of standing up. Alexander Reed had spent his entire adult life paying that price, and he wasn't about to stop now. Already subscribed? Leave a like and tell us where you're watching from. We want to know where our audience comes from. He went to bed knowing that tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, he'd have to have some difficult conversations with Amelia. Tomorrow, he'd need to make plans, arrangements. Tomorrow, the hunt would begin in earnest, because Victor and Daniel Zimmerman would be looking for her. They'd tear Chicago apart if they had to. But tonight, Amelia was safe. And sometimes, that was enough. The next morning arrived gray and cold, the storm having passed but leaving behind a dreary November chill that seeped into everything. Alexander woke early, as was his habit, and found Amelia already awake, standing at the windows and looking out at the city. She'd found some of the spare clothes he'd left outside her door, a t-shirt and sweatpants that were comically too large for her slender frame, but at least they were dry and clean. "Good morning," Alexander said carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Did you sleep at all?" "A little," Amelia said without turning around. "Thank you for the clothes. I hope that was okay. I found them outside my door. I left them there. I figured you'd want something dry." Alexander moved to the kitchen area and started making coffee. "Are you hungry? I can order breakfast, or we can go downstairs to the restaurant if you'd prefer." "I can't go downstairs," Amelia said quickly, finally turning to face him. In the morning light, he could see her more clearly. The exhaustion in her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped her arms around herself. "If anyone sees me, if they're looking, Alexander said quietly. He poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. "Amelia, I need to be honest with you. After you went to bed last night, I did some research. I know who your father is. I know who Victor is. And I know that what you're running from is much more serious than a simple unwanted marriage." Amelia's face went pale. The coffee cup shook in her hands. "You looked me up. Oh God, you know. Then you know what they'll do if they find me. You know what they're capable of." She set the coffee cup down before she dropped it, her entire body beginning to shake. "I should go. I shouldn't have stayed. I've put you in danger. They'll hurt you if they think you're helping me. Amelia." Alexander's voice cut through her rising panic like a knife. "Look at me." She did, her brown eyes wide with terror. "I know exactly what they're capable of," Alexander said calmly. "And I'm still standing here, offering to help you. Do you know why?" She shook her head mutely. "Because I've spent the last 15 years of my life taking down men exactly like your father and Victor. I'm one of the top federal prosecutors in this region, specializing in organized crime and money laundering. I've put away CEOs, politicians, mob bosses. I know their playbook. I know their tactics. I know their weaknesses." He stepped closer, his blue eyes locked on hers. "And more importantly, I know how to protect you while we figure out your next move." My next move? Amelia's voice cracked. There is no next move. They'll find me. They always find people who run. And when they do... She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need. 2. They both knew what would happen. Not this time, Alexander said firmly. Not if we're smart. Not if we plan carefully. He gestured to the sofa. Sit. Let me explain what I'm thinking. They sat, and Alexander laid out his plan with the precision of a master strategist who'd done this countless times before. First, we need to establish your legal position. You're an adult, which means you can't be forced into a marriage. But if your father has any kind of guardianship or conservatorship over you... He doesn't, Emilia interrupted. I'm 26, legally independent. Good, that's good. Second, we need to keep you hidden until we can figure out a more permanent solution. This hotel suite is secure, but it's not a long-term answer. They'll check hotels, question staff, pull surveillance footage. We need to move you somewhere they won't think to look. Where? Emilia asked, a tiny spark of hope flickering in her eyes. Alexander hesitated, then made a decision that would alter both their lives irrevocably. My penthouse. I have a place in the Gold Coast. High security, doorman who's worked for me for 10 years and is completely loyal, and it's the last place anyone would think to look because it's me. Alexander Reed, the lawyer who has no personal connections to you or your family. We'll create a cover story, something that explains why you're with me, why you're in my home. What kind of cover story could possibly explain that? Emilia asked. Alexander met her eyes. Steadily. We tell people you're my wife. The words hung in the air between them like a bomb waiting to explode. Emilia stared at him, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process what he'd just said. Your wife, she finally repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Think about it, Alexander said, warming to the idea now that he'd said it aloud. If Victor and your father are looking for a frightened young woman on her own, they won't be looking for Mrs. Alexander Reed. They won't question a respectable married couple. And it gives us legal protection. Spousal privilege means you can't be forced to testify about our conversations. And it creates a legitimate reason for you to be living in my home, being seen with me in public. But we don't even know each other, Emilia protested weakly. We'll learn, Alexander said simply. We'll need to, if we're going to make this convincing. But Emilia, I'm not asking you to actually marry me. This is a cover, a strategic protection, a way to keep you safe until we can find a permanent solution, whether that's getting you out of the country, building a legal case against Victor and your father, or something else entirely. Why would you do this? Emilia's voice broke. You don't know me. This could destroy your career, your reputation. If anyone finds out you're harboring me, lying about a marriage, let me worry about my career, Alexander said quietly. I'm doing this because it's right, because I've seen too many people, like you, fall through the cracks, become victims because no one was willing to take the risk to help them. And because... He paused, considering whether to tell her the truth, decided she deserved it. Because I know what it's like to be trapped by people who are supposed to love you. I know what it's like to have your choices stolen. And I swore a long time ago that whenever I had the power to prevent that from happening to someone else, I would. Emilia searched his face, looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She found none. What she found instead was something that startled her. Genuine empathy, understanding. A shared pain that he kept buried deep, but that showed in the shadows behind his eyes. Okay, she whispered. Okay. We'll try it your way. Alexander nodded, relief flooding through him, though he kept his expression neutral. Good. Then here's what we do. We stay in this suite today. I'll make some calls, arrange to have some clothes brought up for you. Nothing. That looks like you. Everything that looks like Mrs. Reed. Tomorrow we move to my place. We'll introduce you to my doorman and a few key people as my wife. And then we start building your case. My case? For a restraining order against Victor. For protection. We document everything. The bruise on your wrist, your testimony about his threats, his first wife's suspicious death. We build a paper trail that will make it very difficult for him to touch you without consequences. And while we're doing that, I'll use my resources to dig deeper into the Zimmerman family business. If we're lucky, we might find something we can use as leverage. You want to blackmail my father? Amelia asked, her eyes widening. I want to create a situation where hurting you becomes more costly than leaving you alone, Alexander corrected. There's a difference. I'm not interested in destroying your father unless he forces my hand. I'm interested in protecting you. For the first time since Alexander had met her, Amelia smiled. It was small, tentative, but genuine. You really think this could work? I do, Alexander said with absolute confidence. But Amelia, I need you to understand something. Once we start this, we're committed. We'll need to maintain the fiction completely, at least in public. That means acting like a married couple when anyone else is around. It means creating a believable story about how we met, how we fell in love. It means selling this lie perfectly. I understand, Amelia said, though her heart was racing at the implications. Pretend to be married to this man, this stranger who'd shown her more kindness in 12 hours than her own family had in years. Live in his home, learn his habits, become, at least on the surface, his wife. It was terrifying. It was insane. It was probably going to blow up spectacularly in both their faces, but it was also her only chance at survival. And as Amelia looked at Alexander, at the determination in his eyes, the strength in the set of his jaw, the promise of safety that radiated from him, she realized she trusted him. Against all logic, against all her instincts of self-preservation, she trusted this man who'd appeared in her darkest moment and offered her hope. When do we start? She asked. Alexander glanced at his watch. Right now, we have a lot of work to do. The rest of that day passed in a blur of activity. Alexander made phone calls to his assistant, his doorman, a few trusted colleagues. To each he delivered the same carefully crafted message. He'd gotten married. It had been sudden, a whirlwind romance with a woman he'd met a few months ago. They'd kept it quiet because of the nature of his work, the sensitivity of his cases. He was taking a few days off to settle his new wife into his home, and he'd appreciate their discretion about his personal life. The responses were predictably shocked. Alexander Reed, the confirmed bachelor who worked 18-hour days and never dated, was suddenly married? It seemed impossible. But Alexander's reputation was such that no one questioned him directly. If he said he was married, then he was married. And if he wanted privacy, he'd get it. A personal shopper arrived in the afternoon with an array of clothes for Amelia. Elegant but understated pieces that would fit the image of Alexander Reed's wife. Nothing too flashy, nothing that would draw attention. Simple dresses, well-cut pants, cashmere sweaters. All in Amelia's size, which meant Alexander had been paying very close attention to her measurements. As the day wore on, they began the process of building their cover story. They sat at the suite's dining table, coffee growing cold between them, and constructed their fictional relationship. We met 6 months ago at a charity gala, Alexander decided. The Northwestern Hospital fundraiser. I remember it well. Lots of Chicago's wealthy elite. Plenty of witnesses who'll remember seeing me there even if they don't remember seeing you. What if someone knows I was there with my father? Amelia asked nervously. Then we say we met briefly. I asked for your number, and we reconnected later. Alexander improvised smoothly. The point is to keep the details vague enough that no one can disprove them, but specific enough to seem real. They worked out the details of their courtship. Secret dinners at obscure restaurants, long conversations on the phone, Alexander's demanding work schedule keeping them apart, Amelia's complicated family situation making her reluctant to introduce him to her father. All of it building to a romantic proposal 2 weeks ago, a quiet wedding at City Hall last week, and now the big reveal to his professional circle. What about your family? Amelia asked. Won't they wonder why they weren't invited to your wedding? Alexander's expression shuddered slightly. I don't have family. My parents are dead. No siblings. It'll actually make this easier. Fewer people to convince. There was, a story there, Emilia realized. A pain beneath those simple statements that matched the shadows she'd seen in his eyes before. But she didn't push. She had her own secrets, her own pain. If Alexander wanted to share his, he would in his own time. As evening approached, Alexander ordered room service, a meal far more elaborate than Emilia had expected. "We're celebrating," he explained at her questioning look. "Our fake marriage. Might as well make it feel real." They ate in comfortable silence, the tension of the day giving way to a strange kind of peace. Emilia found herself relaxing in Alexander's presence, found herself actually enjoying their conversation when they did speak. He was intelligent, well-read, funny in a dry, understated way. He asked her about her studies at Northwestern, her interests, her dreams for the future. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, someone was actually listening to her answers. "I wanted to be a teacher," Emilia admitted over dessert. "Elementary school. I love children, love the idea of shaping young minds. But my father—" She stopped, the familiar weight of disappointment settling over her. "Your father had other plans," Alexander finished for her. "Let me guess. He wanted you to go into the family business, or at least marry someone connected to it." "Victor was both," Emilia said bitterly. "The perfect solution. Keep the business in the family, strengthen the alliance with his branch of the Zimmermans, and ensure—" "I stayed under control." She looked up at Alexander, her brown eyes bright with unshed tears. "I was never a daughter to him, just an asset, a piece on a chessboard to be moved where he needed me. Then we'll make sure he can never move you again," Alexander said with quiet intensity. "Emilia, I promise you, by the time we're done, you'll have the freedom to make your own choices, to become whoever you want to be." "Even a teacher?" Emilia asked, a small, hopeful smile tugging at her lips. "Especially a teacher," Alexander confirmed. "Chicago always needs good teachers. I have some connections at the school board. When this is over, if that's what you want, I'll help you make it happen. Just one click. Subscribe, leave a like, and say where you're watching from. Your support is essential for our growth." That night, as Emilia lay in her bed, which was starting to feel less foreign, more safe, she found herself thinking about Alexander Reed, about the man behind the lawyer, the person beneath the professional exterior. He'd been hurt, she realized, badly. Whatever had happened to his family, whatever had driven him to become the person he was, it had left scars. Scars he kept hidden behind competence and confidence, and the armor of his career. They were more alike than she'd initially thought, both running from pasts that haunted them, both building walls to keep the world at a safe distance, both pretending to be okay when inside they were barely holding together. Maybe that's why she trusted him, Emilia thought, as sleep finally claimed her. Because he understood. Because when Alexander Reed looked at her, he didn't see a victim, or an asset, or a problem to be solved. He saw another human being struggling to survive in a world that was often cruel and always complicated. He saw her, really saw her, and that made all the difference. The move to Alexander's penthouse happened on a grey Tuesday morning. They left the hotel through a service entrance just in case anyone was watching the main lobby. Alexander had arranged for his car, a sleek black Mercedes, to be waiting in the underground garage. Emilia wore one of her new outfits, a simple gray dress and coat that made her look sophisticated and expensive, the kind of woman who would be married to a successful attorney. "Remember," Alexander said as they drove through Chicago's downtown streets, "you're confident. You're my wife. You belong here. If anyone questions you, you don't get defensive or, nervous. You simply state the facts and move on." "Easy for you to say," Emilia muttered. But she straightened her posture, lifted her chin. She'd spent her entire life performing for her father's business associates, playing the role of dutiful daughter. This was just another performance. A better one, because this time, the role came with actual freedom at the end. Alexander's penthouse was in a building on East Cedar Street, one of the most exclusive addresses in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood. The doorman, a distinguished-looking man named James, greeted them with professional warmth that shifted to barely concealed shock when Alexander introduced Emilia as his wife. "James, this is my wife, Emilia," Alexander said smoothly. "She'll be living here now, of course. Please make sure she has access to everything she needs." "Of course, Mr. Reed, Mrs. Reed." James recovered quickly, years of professional training taking over. "Welcome. It's a pleasure to meet you. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you, James," Emilia said, summoning the grace and poise her expensive education had drilled into her. "It's lovely to meet you." The penthouse itself was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Lake Michigan and the city. The interior was decorated in shades of gray and blue, modern and elegant without being cold. There was a library with built-in shelves lined with law books and classic literature, up by state-of-the-art kitchen that looked barely used, a gym, and 3 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom. "The master bedroom is here," Alexander said, leading her down a hallway. "It has the best view and the largest bathroom. You'll take it." "Where will you sleep?" Emilia asked. "The guest room," Alexander said. "It's perfectly comfortable." "Emilia, I know this is all extremely strange, and we're essentially strangers living together. I want you to feel like this is your space, your home, at least for now. Take the master bedroom. Consider this entire place yours. I spend most of my time in the library anyway when I'm working from home." Emilia looked at the master bedroom. It was larger than some apartments she'd seen, with a king-size bed, a sitting area, and indeed, an incredible view of the lake. "Are you sure?" "Positive. Besides, if anyone visits unexpectedly, it needs to look like we share that room. Having your things in there sells the story." Alexander glanced at his watch. "I need to make some calls, set up some meetings. Take your time settling in. There's food in the kitchen. The building has a gym and a pool on the top floor if you want to use them. But I'd advise staying in the penthouse for now. At least until we're sure Victor and your father aren't actively searching the city for you." "Okay," Emilia said, suddenly feeling overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. She was in a stranger's home, pretending to be his wife, hiding from her family who would stop at nothing to find her. It was surreal, terrifying, and yet somehow she felt safer than she had in years. Over the following days, they settled into an unusual routine. Alexander worked from his home library most mornings, taking calls with clients and colleagues, reviewing case files. Emilia explored the penthouse, read books from Alexander's extensive collection, and tried to process the trauma of everything she'd been through. They cooked dinner together in the evenings. Alexander turned out to be a surprisingly good cook, a skill he'd learned during law school when living on takeout became too expensive. They talked. Long conversations that stretched into the night, covering everything from their favorite books to their philosophies on life. Emilia told Alexander about growing up in the Zimmerman household, about the gradual realization that her father wasn't the man she'd thought he was, about watching her mother wither away from breast cancer when Emilia was 15, and how her father had remarried within a year to a woman half his age who had no interest in being a stepmother. Alexander told her about his own childhood, a story that explained so much about the man he'd become. His parents had been academics, professors at the University of Chicago. His father had been respected in his field until he'd crossed paths with a wealthy donor who wanted a degree without doing the work. When Alexander's father had refused to compromise his academic integrity, the donor, who turned out to be connected to organized crime, had destroyed him. False accusations of misconduct, fabricated evidence, a systematic campaign that had cost him his job, his reputation, and eventually, his life. He'd committed suicide when Alexander was 17. "That's when I decided to become a lawyer," Alexander said quietly, staring out at the lake. They were sitting in the living room, sharing a bottle of wine after dinner. I watched powerful, corrupt people destroy my father, because he wouldn't bend. I watched the system fail him at every turn, because he didn't have the resources to fight back. And I swore I would become the person who could fight back, who could take down the people who thought they were untouchable. Is that why you helped me? Emilia asked. Because you see your father in me? No, Alexander said, turning to look at her. I see you. Just you. A person who deserves better than what they've been given. A person who had the courage to run rather than surrender. That's not my father's story, that's yours. The intensity in his eyes when he said it made Emilia's breath catch. For a moment she couldn't look away, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but feel the strange electricity that had been building between them over these past few days of forced proximity and shared vulnerability. Then Alexander's phone rang, shattering the moment. He answered it with his usual professional efficiency, but Emilia saw the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened. When he hung up, his expression was grim. That was a contact of mine in the Chicago PD, he said. Victor Zimmerman filed a missing persons report on you 2 days ago. He's claiming you're mentally unstable, possibly a danger to yourself, and that he's your fiancé trying to find you to get you help. Emilia felt the blood drain from her face. He's laying groundwork. If he finds me, he can claim I need to be committed, that he's taking me back for my own. Good. That's exactly what he's doing, Alexander confirmed. It's a smart play. Makes him look like the concerned partner while painting you as unreliable if you try to tell anyone what really happened. He stood, began pacing. We need to move faster than I'd planned. I'm filing for a restraining order against Victor tomorrow, and I'm going to reach out to a friend at the FBI. If we can get federal authorities interested in the Zimmerman operation, it creates a protective umbrella over you. Won't that make Victor more desperate? Emilia asked, fear creeping into her voice. If he knows the FBI is circling, it might, Alexander admitted. But right now, we need to create as many obstacles as possible between you and Victor. Legal obstacles, official obstacles, things that make grabbing you off the street complicated and risky. He stopped pacing and looked at her. Emilia, I need you to trust me on this. I've done this before. I know how to protect witnesses, how to build cases. Against people like Victor. You're not alone in this fight. I know, Emilia whispered. I trust you, I do, She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the apartment. I'm scared. He's going to find out I'm here eventually. Someone will talk, or he'll see me, or then we make sure that when he does find out, he can't touch you, Alexander interrupted. That's why we're building our case. That's why we're creating the paper trail. By the time Victor figures out where you are, you'll have legal protection, federal interest in the Zimmerman organization, and a very public relationship with me. Doing anything to you becomes exponentially more complicated. And more dangerous for you, Emilia pointed out. Alexander smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I've been living dangerously for 15 years. I'm still here. That night, Emilia couldn't sleep. She lay in the massive master bedroom, listening to the sounds of the city outside the windows, and thought about Alexander Reed, about the man who'd turned his personal tragedy into a mission, who'd spent his adult life fighting battles for people who couldn't fight for themselves, about the way he looked at her, not with pity or desire, but with genuine respect and understanding. She was starting to care about him, more than she should, more than was wise, given that their entire relationship was built on a lie, a convenient fiction designed to keep her safe. But emotions didn't follow logic. And the truth was, living with Alexander, spending hours in conversation with him, watching him work with that sharp intelligence and unwavering dedication, it was doing things to her heart that had nothing to do with gratitude or convenience. In his own bedroom down the hall, Alexander was having similar thoughts. He told himself it was just proximity, just the natural result of spending intense time with an intelligent, beautiful woman. Just his protective instincts going into overdrive, because she reminded him of all the people he'd failed to help over the years, all the cases he'd lost, all the victims who'd slipped through the cracks. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. Emilia Zimmerman was getting under his skin. Her courage impressed him. Her vulnerability touched something in him he'd thought long dead. The way she smiled when she discovered a book she loved in his library, the way she hummed while cooking, the way she listened when he talked about his cases with genuine interest. All of it was chipping away at the walls he'd spent years building around his heart. It was dangerous, unprofessional, potentially disastrous for both of them. They were supposed to be focused on survival, on fighting Victor and Daniel Zimmerman, on building a legal case. Developing actual feelings for each other would complicate everything. But telling his heart to stop caring was like telling the lake to stop having waves. Some forces were beyond control. And Alexander Reed, who'd built his career on controlling every variable, every outcome, found himself completely unable to control what was happening between him and the woman sleeping down the hall. The following morning, they went to the courthouse. Alexander had arranged for an emergency hearing on Emilia's request for a restraining order against Victor. He'd prepared her thoroughly for what to expect, how to present herself, what to say, and what to leave unsaid. Emilia wore a conservative navy dress that made her look older, more serious. She pulled her hair back in a simple bun and wore minimal jewelry. The goal was to look credible, composed. Nothing like the unstable woman Victor was claiming she was. The hearing was held in a small courtroom with just the judge, court staff, and the two of them. Victor hadn't been notified. This was an ex parte hearing, meant to establish temporary protection until a full hearing could be scheduled. Alexander presented the case with devastating efficiency, walking the judge through Victor's threats, the suspicious death of his first wife, the bruise on Emilia's wrist that had been photographed and entered into evidence. When it was Emilia's turn to testify, she spoke clearly and calmly, recounting Victor's words in her father's study, describing the fear she'd felt, the certainty that if she'd gone through with the marriage, she wouldn't have survived it. She didn't cry, didn't show emotion beyond appropriate seriousness. She was, Alexander thought with pride, absolutely perfect. The judge, a middle-aged woman named Catherine Morrison, listened carefully and asked pointed questions. Finally, she nodded. "I'm granting the temporary restraining order. Mr. Victor Zimmerman is to stay at least 500 feet away from Miss..." She paused. "I'm sorry, the paperwork lists you as Emilia Reed. I thought your name was Zimmerman." "I recently married," Emilia said smoothly, exactly as Alexander had coached her. "Alexander Reed is my husband." Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly as she looked at Alexander, clearly recognizing him. "Counselor Reed, you're representing your own wife in this matter?" "I am, Your Honor. The circumstances were such that we needed to move quickly, and I'm the most qualified attorney to handle this case." Alexander met the judge's eyes steadily. "I recognize the unusual nature of the situation, but I assure the court that my professional judgment remains sound." "I'm sure it does, Judge," Morrison said dryly. "Very well. The temporary restraining order is in effect immediately. Mr. Zimmerman will be notified, and we'll schedule a full hearing in 2 weeks." She looked at Emilia with something like sympathy. "Mrs. Reed, if you feel you're in immediate danger, do not hesitate to contact the police. This order gives you legal protection, but it's only as good as the enforcement behind it." "Thank you, Your Honor," Emilia said. As they left the courthouse, Alexander noticed Emilia was trembling slightly, despite her outward composure. He took her hand, a gesture that would have seemed natural to any observers, a husband comforting his wife, and felt her grip tighten on his fingers. "You did brilliantly," he said quietly as they walked to his car. "That was perfect." "I felt like I was going to throw up the entire time," Emilia admitted. "You didn't show it. That's what matters." Alexander helped her into the car, then paused before closing the door. "Emilia, you need to understand something. Victor will be served with this restraining order today. That means he'll know exactly where to find you, or at least that you're in Chicago and connected to me. Things are about to get much more complicated." "I know," Emilia said, looking up at him with those brown eyes that seemed to see straight through all his careful professional distance. "But I'm not alone anymore. That makes all the difference." Alexander's response was cut off by his phone ringing. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and answered. "Reed." His expression darkened as he listened. "When?" "I see. Yes, I'll be there." He hung up and looked at Emilia, his face grim. "That was my contact at the FBI. They want to meet with us, today. They've been building a case against the Zimmerman organization for the past 2 years, and they think you might have information that could help them." "I don't know anything about my father's business," Emilia protested. "He kept me completely separate from all that." "You know more than you think," Alexander said. "You grew up in that house. You heard conversations, saw people coming and going, noticed patterns. The FBI doesn't need you to have detailed financial records. They need the human element, the connections, the relationships, the things that don't show up in bank statements but are crucial for building a RICO case." "RICO?" Emilia asked. "Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act," Alexander explained. "It's the law they use to take down organized crime families. If the FBI can prove your father and Victor are running a criminal enterprise, they can seize assets, bring federal charges, and essentially dismantle the entire operation." He paused. "Emilia, if you cooperate with them, if you testify against your father, he'll never forgive me," Emilia finished. "I'll lose whatever family I have left." "You might," Alexander said honestly. "Or your father might realize that his only chance at leniency is to cooperate too, to take a deal. Either way, this is your chance to not just escape Victor, but to actually bring down the system that created this nightmare in the first place." Emilia was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the Chicago streets. Finally, she said, "When do they want to meet?" "This afternoon. Downtown FBI office." "Then let's go," Emilia said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Let's finish this." The FBI offices were in the Dirksen Federal Building, a massive structure that took up an entire block in downtown Chicago. Alexander and Emilia were escorted to a conference room where 2 agents waited. Special Agent Maria Gonzalez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, and Special Agent Thomas Bradley, younger, with the kind of intense focus that suggested he was very good at his job. "Mrs. Reed, Mr. Reed, thank you for coming," Agent Gonzalez said, shaking their hands. "Please sit. Can we get you anything? Coffee? Water?" They declined, and Agent Gonzalez got straight to business. "We've been investigating Daniel Zimmerman's operations for over 2 years. We know about the money laundering through his import-export business, the connections to organized crime families in Europe and Asia, the pattern of violence and intimidation he uses to maintain control. What we don't have is the kind of insider testimony that would make our case airtight." "I'm not an insider," Emilia said carefully. "I'm his daughter, but he never discussed business with me." "But you lived in his house," Agent Bradley said, leaning forward. "You saw people, heard names. You were present at social gatherings where business associates were present. You might not think you know anything, but trust me, you do." Over the next 3 hours, the agents questioned Emilia methodically. They showed her photographs, asked her to identify people, to remember details about meetings and phone calls and visitors to her father's house. Slowly, a picture emerged. Emilia hadn't realized how much she'd absorbed over the years. Names, faces, connections. She remembered a man from Amsterdam who'd visited frequently and always left with a briefcase. Another from Singapore who'd seemed nervous, looking over his shoulder constantly. Conversations she'd overheard about shipments and payments, cleaning money. Alexander watched her during the questioning, saw the moment she realized the full extent of her father's crimes, saw the way her face fell when she understood that she was about to become the witness who would bring down her own family. And he saw the moment she made her choice, to do the right thing, even though it would cost her everything she'd known. "I'll testify," Amelia said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "Whatever you need me to say, whatever will help build your case, I'll do it." Agent Gonzalez nodded, something like respect in her eyes. "That takes courage, Mrs. Reed. I know this isn't easy." "Will she need protection?" Alexander asked. "Witness protection?" "We're considering it," Agent Bradley said. "But the truth is, witness protection isn't always necessary if we move fast enough. If we can arrest Daniel and Victor Zimmerman before they have time to retaliate, and if we can get them to take plea deals that include agreements not to pursue her." He spread his hands. "There are ways to handle this that don't require her to disappear." "But there are no guarantees," Alexander said flatly. "No," Agent Gonzalez admitted. "There are never guarantees, in cases like these. But Mrs. Reed, you're already partially protected. You're married to one of the most prominent attorneys in Chicago. You have a restraining order against Victor. You're not an easy target anymore." They left the FBI offices late in the afternoon, both of them mentally exhausted. The drive back to the penthouse was quiet. Finally, Amelia said, "I just agreed to destroy my father." "You agreed to stop him from destroying anyone else," Alexander corrected gently. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Amelia's voice cracked. "He's my father. Whatever he's done, however terrible he's been, he's still my father. And I just signed his death warrant. Because that's what this is. Even if he doesn't go to prison for life, his business will be destroyed, his reputation ruined. Everything he's built will come crashing down. Because of me." Alexander pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to face her. "Amelia, listen to me. Your father made his choices. He chose to get involved in organized crime. He chose to launder money for dangerous people. He chose to try to force you into a marriage with a man who probably killed his first wife. Those were his choices. You're not responsible for the consequences." "Then why does it feel like I am?" Amelia whispered, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Alexander reached over and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. The gesture was tender, intimate in a way that went far beyond their fake marriage. "Because you're a good person who was raised to be loyal, even to people who don't deserve it. But Amelia, loyalty to family doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. It doesn't mean enabling terrible things. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop someone from continuing to hurt people, even if that someone is your father." Amelia leaned into his touch, and before either of them consciously decided to do it, she was in his arms, crying against his chest while he held her. They stayed like that for a long time, parked on a Chicago side street as evening fell around them. Two people who'd started as strangers and had somehow become each other's shelter in a storm. When Amelia finally pulled back, her eyes were red but clear. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything. For seeing me in that hotel lobby. For taking me in. For helping me fight back. For—" she paused, searching for words. "For making me feel like I matter. Like I'm worth protecting." "You are worth protecting," Alexander said fiercely. "You're worth everything, Amelia. Don't ever doubt that." The intensity in his voice, the way he looked at her, it made Amelia's heart race. She realized with a jolt of awareness that what she was feeling wasn't just gratitude or dependence or the result of proximity. It was deeper than that, more dangerous than that. She was falling in love with Alexander Reed. The realization should have terrified her. Their entire relationship was built on a lie. When this was over, when Victor was dealt with and her father's case was closed, they'd have no reason to continue their fake marriage. They'd go their separate ways. Alexander would go back to his cases and his solitary life. And Amelia would, what? Start over somewhere new? Rebuild her life from scratch? But the thought of leaving him, of losing this connection they'd built, hurt more than any of the rest of it. Which was insane. Which was impractical. Which was going to end badly for both of them. But knowing all that didn't change how she felt. They drove the rest of the way home in charged silence, both of them acutely aware of the shift that had occurred between them. When they got back to the penthouse, Alexander suggested they order dinner rather than cook. They needed easy, simple, something that didn't require them to work together in the intimate space of the kitchen. While they waited for the food, Emilia retreated to the master bedroom, needing space to process everything. She stood at the windows, looking out at the lake, and tried to make sense of her emotions. In less than 2 weeks, her entire life had been upended. She'd fled an abusive situation, found refuge with a stranger, agreed to pretend to be his wife, and was now cooperating with federal agents to bring down her own father. Any one of those things would have been traumatic enough. All of them together should have left her a complete mess. But she wasn't a mess. She was clearer and more certain than she'd been in years. Because for the first time in her life, she was making her own choices. She was deciding her own fate. And yes, it was terrifying. Yes, there would be consequences. But they would be consequences of her own actions, not of her father's control or Victor's abuse. And Alexander, complicated, brilliant, damaged Alexander, had made all of it possible. There was a soft knock on the bedroom door. "Food's here," Alexander called. "If you're hungry." They ate Thai food on the couch, the news playing softly in the background. About halfway through the meal, Alexander's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression turned grim. "Victor's been served with the restraining order," he said. "My contact at the court just confirmed it. He didn't take it well, apparently. Made some threats about this not being over." "Of course he did," Emilia said, though her appetite had suddenly vanished. "What happens now?" "Now we wait," Alexander said. "The FBI is moving forward with their investigation. We have the restraining order in place, and we maintain our cover. You're Mrs. Alexander Reed, safe and protected. Victor can rage all he wants, but he can't touch you without facing serious legal consequences." "You make it sound so simple," Emilia said. "It's not simple, but it is manageable. One step at a time, Emilia. That's all we can do." That night, Emilia lay in bed and listened to the sounds of the penthouse. She could hear Alexander moving around in his room, probably working late, as he usually did. She thought about getting up, going to him, having one of their long, late-night conversations. But something stopped her. A sense that if she did that tonight, if she sought him out after the emotional intensity of the day, after that moment in the car when they'd held each other, something would change between them. Something that couldn't be unchanged. And she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Not when everything was still so uncertain, so dangerous. But 3 days later, when Alexander came home from a meeting with the FBI looking shaken and exhausted, when he sank onto the couch with his head in his hands, Emilia didn't hesitate. She sat beside him and took his hand. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Alexander was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "The FBI got a warrant. They raided your father's offices today. Found evidence, lots of it. Financial records, communications with known criminals, everything they need to build their case. They're going to arrest him. Probably within the next 48 hours. Emilia felt her world tilt. "Oh, God." "There's more," Alexander continued, his voice strained. "When they searched his office, they found files, plans. Victor had been planning to kill you after the wedding. Make it look like an accident. They found research on methods, timelines, everything." He finally looked at her, and there was rage in his blue eyes. Cold, controlled rage. "You were right to run. If you hadn't, you'd be dead." Within months. Emilia couldn't speak, couldn't process. She'd known Victor was dangerous, but seeing it confirmed, knowing that her father must have known, must have been complicit, broke something inside her. "I'm so sorry," Alexander said, pulling her close. "I'm so sorry you had to hear that." "It's not your fault," Emilia managed. "You saved my life. If you hadn't helped me that night in the hotel—" "Don't," Alexander interrupted. "Don't think about what might have happened. You're safe. That's what matters." They stayed like that, wrapped in each other as evening turned to night. At some point, Alexander suggested they eat something, but neither of them was hungry. They simply sat together on the couch, finding comfort in proximity, in the shared understanding that they were in this together now. Whatever came next, arrests, trials, media attention, they would face it together. "I should go to bed," Amelia finally said, though she made no move to get up. "Tomorrow is going to be difficult." "It is," Alexander agreed. "The arrests will make headlines. Your name will be in the news, probably as my wife, which will raise questions. We need to be prepared for intense scrutiny." "I know," Amelia said. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she said, "Alexander, when this is over, when Victor and my father are dealt with and the case is closed, what happens to us?" The question hung in the air. Alexander was quiet for so long that Amelia thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I don't know. I haven't let myself think that far ahead." "Why not?" "Because thinking about it means acknowledging that this," he gestured between them, "whatever this is, it's real. And if it's real, then I have to deal with the fact that I've developed feelings for you that have nothing to do with protecting a witness or maintaining a cover story. And that terrifies me, Amelia, because I'm not good at relationships. I'm good at cases and strategy and fighting. But actual human connection? That's a battlefield where I've lost more often than I've won." Amelia's heart was racing. "What kind of feelings?" she whispered. Alexander met her eyes, and in his gaze she saw everything. The desire, the fear, the hope, the certainty. "The kind that make me lie awake at night thinking about you. The kind that make me want to protect you from everything, even things I can't control. The kind that make me imagine what it would be like if this marriage were real. If you were actually mine, and I was actually yours." "Alexander," Amelia breathed, but he wasn't finished. "I know this is wrong," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I should be maintaining professional distance. I know our situation makes this complicated in ways that could hurt both of us. But I can't seem to make myself care about any of that when I look at you. When I see your courage, your strength, your kindness, despite everything you've been through. You're extraordinary, Amelia. And, I'm falling for you. Have been since the moment I saw you in that hotel lobby, looking terrified and brave all at once." Amelia realized she was crying. "I'm falling for you too," she said. "I've been trying not to. I've been telling myself it's just the situation, just proximity and adrenaline and gratitude. But it's not. It's you. The way you listen when I talk. The way you fight for what's right even when it costs you. The way you see me. Really see me. Not as someone's daughter or someone's, property, but as me. Just Amelia." For a moment they simply stared at each other, the weight of their confessions hanging between them. Then Alexander reached up and cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. "Tell me this is a bad idea, and we should maintain boundaries. Tell me we should wait until your case is resolved and you're safe and we're not living in this pressure cooker of danger and deception." "I don't want to tell you to stop," Amelia said, her voice barely audible. "I want you to kiss me. I want to feel something real in the middle of all these lies. I want—" Alexander kissed her, cutting off her words. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Amelia didn't pull away. She kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion and longing and need that had been building over the past 2 weeks. Her hands came up to grip his shoulders, and his arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said. "I know," Amelia replied. "We can't go back from this." "I don't want to go back." "Amelia." Alexander pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "I need you to understand something. What I feel for you. It's not going to go away when this is over. This isn't some temporary thing for me. If we do this, if we cross this line, I'm all in. Completely. I don't do halfway." "Neither do I," Amelia said firmly. "Alexander, I know the timing is terrible. I know we're in the middle of a crisis. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is complicated. But I also know that I've never felt this way about anyone. That you make me feel safe and seen and valued in ways I didn't know were possible. And I don't want to wait until some hypothetical future when everything is resolved. I want to be with you now, for however long we have. Alexander studied her face, searching for any sign of doubt or uncertainty. He found none. All right, he said finally. Then we do this. For real. He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation. This time it was a promise, a commitment, the beginning of something that both of them knew would change their lives forever. They spent that night together in the master bedroom, not just physically but in every sense that mattered. They talked until dawn, sharing stories and secrets and fears. They held each other through the difficult moments when the weight of what was coming felt too heavy to bear. And they made love with a tenderness and intensity that left them both shaken, both certain that whatever happened next, they would face it together. When morning came, bringing with it the news of Daniel and Victor Zimmerman's arrests, Alexander and Amelia faced it side by side. They watched the coverage together. Footage of FBI agents leading her father and Victor out of there. Officers in handcuffs, reporters speculating about the charges, mentions of a witness whose testimony had been crucial to building the case. "It's done," Amelia said softly, watching her father's face on the screen. He looked old suddenly, defeated, nothing like the powerful man who'd controlled her life for so long. "It's really done." "The arrests are done," Alexander corrected. "But the trial will take months, maybe longer. And they're going to come after you, Amelia. Defense attorneys will try to discredit your testimony, paint you as vindictive or unstable. This is just the beginning of the fight." "But I'm not fighting alone," Amelia said, turning to him. "I have you." "You do," Alexander confirmed, "for as long as you want me." "That might be forever," Amelia warned with a small smile. "I'm counting on it," Alexander replied, and kissed her again. The next few months were a whirlwind. The media descended on the story with ravenous interest. Prominent businessman and his nephew. Arrested on federal racketeering charges, family insider agrees to testify. Reporters tried to track down Amelia, but Alexander's careful planning paid off. As far as the public knew, she was Mrs. Alexander Reed, wife of a prominent attorney, living a quiet life away from the spotlight. The connection to the Zimmerman case was there, of course, but Alexander's reputation and connections helped shield her from the worst of the attention. The preliminary hearings were brutal. Defense attorneys did exactly what Alexander had predicted. They attacked Amelia's credibility, suggested she was lying to hurt her father, brought up her past in ways designed to make her look unstable or vindictive. But Amelia held firm, and Agent Gonzalez and the FBI had built such a strong case with physical evidence that Amelia's testimony became supplementary rather than central. They didn't need her to prove the crimes had been committed. They just needed her to provide context, to humanize the case, to show the jury what kind of men Daniel and Victor Zimmerman really were. Victor took a plea deal after the first month, probably calculating that he had less to lose by cooperating. He agreed to testify against Daniel in exchange for a reduced sentence, 30 years instead of life. His testimony about planning to kill Amelia after their marriage was particularly damning, and when the judge asked Amelia if she wanted to make a victim impact statement, she stood in front of the courtroom and spoke, clearly about the fear she'd lived with, the knowledge that she'd been nothing more than a pawn in her father's games. Daniel Zimmerman refused to take a deal. He went to trial, confident that his expensive lawyers could find reasonable doubt, could convince a jury that he was just a businessman who'd made some poor choices. But the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, communications, testimony from associates who'd turned on him to save themselves, and Amelia sitting in the witness box, calmly describing life in the Zimmerman household, the constant presence of dangerous men, the implicit threats, the gradual understanding that her father valued power more than he valued her. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they came back with a guilty verdict on all counts, Emilia felt something break inside her, but in a good way, like a dam finally giving way and letting the flood of emotion through. She cried in Alexander's arms outside the courtroom, mourning the father she'd never really had, grieving the family that had never truly existed, but also feeling a strange sense of relief. It was over. She was free. The sentencing hearing happened 2 weeks later. Daniel Zimmerman was given 45 years in federal prison. At 63 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Daniel looked across the courtroom at Emilia. For a moment, she thought she saw regret in his eyes. But then he simply said, "I did what I had to do to build my empire. I regret that my daughter couldn't understand that." No apology. No acknowledgement of his crimes. No recognition of the harm he'd caused. Just the same cold calculation that had defined his entire life. Emilia didn't cry this time. She simply stood, took Alexander's hand, and walked out of the courthouse into the bright Chicago sunshine. It was May, warm and promising, the kind of day that felt like new beginnings. "Are you all right?" Alexander asked as they walked to his car. "I am," Emilia said, and realized it was true. "I'm actually okay. Better than okay. For the first time in my life, I'm free to make my own choices, live my own life. And that's everything I was hoping for." They drove back to the penthouse, their home now, not just Alexander's. In the month since her father's arrest, they'd settled into a real relationship, one built on honesty and trust rather than convenience and deception. They'd talked about ending the fake marriage, getting a quiet divorce once the case was over. But neither of them wanted that. What had started as a protective fiction had become the most real thing in either of their lives. Still, there were things they needed to discuss, decisions to make about their future now that the immediate crisis had passed. That evening, over dinner at their favorite restaurant, a quiet Italian place in the West Loop, Alexander brought it up. "We should talk about what happens next," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "The case is closed. You're safe. Your father and Victor are in prison. We've fulfilled the original purpose of our arrangement." "I know," Emilia said, her heart sinking despite knowing this conversation was necessary. "So the question is, what do we want now? Who do we want to be? We can get divorced, end the fiction, and—" "No," Emilia interrupted firmly. "I don't want a divorce. Alexander, I know we started this as a lie, but it became true somewhere along the way. I love you. Actually, genuinely love you. And I want this to be real, not fake, real." Alexander smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "That's good, because I was hoping you'd say that. Emilia, I love you too. But I want to do this right. I want us to have a real beginning, not just a continuation of a cover story." He stood up, and to Emilia's shock, got down on one knee right there in the restaurant. Other diners began to notice, whispers spreading through the room. "Emilia." "Zimmerman Reed," Alexander said, pulling out a small velvet box. "We got married for all the wrong reasons, but I want to marry you again, for all the right ones. Because you're the bravest person I've ever met. Because you make me laugh and think and feel things I thought I'd forgotten how to feel. Because loving you has healed parts of me I didn't know were broken. Will you marry me? For real this time?" Emilia was crying, laughing, nodding all at once. "Yes, God, yes, of course I'll marry." "You!" He slipped a ring onto her finger, a simple, elegant diamond that was nothing like the ostentatious jewelry Victor had tried to give her. This was perfect. This was them. The restaurant erupted in applause. Alexander stood and pulled Emilia into his arms, kissing her while strangers cheered. And for the first time in her life, Emilia felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. They got married again, 3 months later, in a small ceremony at a church in Lincoln Park. Agent Gonzalez came, having become something of a friend during the trial. James the doorman was there, looking pleased as if he'd known all along that the fake marriage would become real. A few of Alexander's colleagues attended, along with some of Emilia's professors from Northwestern who'd stayed in touch over the years. It was nothing like the lavish wedding her father had planned. There was no designer dress that cost more than most people's cars. No hundreds of guests who were really just business contacts. No sense of being on display. Instead, Emilia wore a simple ivory dress she'd chosen herself, carried wildflowers, and spoke vows she'd written from her heart. "I promise to be your partner in everything," she said, her voice steady as she looked into Alexander's eyes. "In the fights we face and the peace we build, in the dark moments and the bright days, I promise to see you, really see you, the way you've seen me from the very beginning. I promise to love you for exactly who you are, a man who fights for justice, who protects the vulnerable, who turned my darkest moment into the beginning of my real life." Alexander's vows were just as heartfelt. "I promise to stand by you always, to protect you when you need protecting, and to step back when you need to fight your own battles. I promise to listen to your dreams and help you achieve them. I promise to be honest even when it's hard, to communicate even when I want to retreat into myself, to choose you every single day. And I promise to love you, not because you need saving, but because you saved me right back." When they kissed, it felt like coming home. Like everything they'd been through, all the danger and deception and difficulty, had been leading them exactly here, to this moment, to each other. The reception was held at a small venue overlooking the lake. They danced their first dance to a song they'd discovered together during one of their late-night conversations, shared cake and celebrated with the people who mattered most. It was simple and perfect, and theirs. Late in the evening, as they stood at the windows looking out at the Chicago skyline, the same view they'd seen from the penthouse on that first terrifying night, Emilia leaned against Alexander and said, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Alexander asked, wrapping his arms around her. "The FBI cleared me to access some of my mother's things from my father's house, things he'd kept in storage. I found letters." Emilia took a breath. "My mother knew about my father's business, about the danger, and she wrote me letters to be given to me if anything happened to her. She wanted me to know that she loved me, that she was sorry she couldn't protect me, and that she hoped someday I'd find the courage to escape and build a life that was truly mine." "Emilia," Alexander said softly. "She would have liked you," Emilia continued, tears in her eyes. "She would have been so grateful that you helped me, that you gave me the chance to have the life she wanted for me." She turned to face him. "I started teaching last week, at an elementary school in Lakeview, 2nd grade. And Alexander, it's wonderful. The kids are amazing, and I finally feel like I'm doing something that matters, something that's mine." "I'm so proud of you," Alexander said, meaning every word. "Your mother would be too." "There's something else," Emilia said, a small smile playing at her lips. "I'm pregnant." Alexander's eyes went wide. "You're really? About 2 months along. I found out last week but wanted to wait until after the wedding to tell you. We're going to have a baby, Alexander. A child who will grow up knowing they're loved, knowing they're free to make their own choices, knowing that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about love and protection and choosing each other every day." Alexander pulled her close, his heart so full he could barely speak. "We're going to be parents." "We are," Emilia confirmed. "Terrified?" "Absolutely," Alexander admitted. "But also, I don't think I've ever been happier. Emilia, you've given me everything. A reason to come home at night. A future that's about more than just cases and battles. Hope, love, a family. You gave me those things first," Emilia pointed out. "That night in the hotel lobby, when you saw me and decided to help, you changed everything. You gave me a chance to become who I was always meant to be." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, watching the city lights reflect off the lake. Two people who'd found each other in the darkest circumstances and had somehow built something beautiful from the ruins of their pasts. Later, Much later, Alexander would learn that he'd been right about Amelia being extraordinary. She became an incredible teacher, beloved by her students and respected by her colleagues. She wrote a book about her experience, about surviving abuse and building a new life, that helped countless. Other people find the courage to escape their own dangerous situations. And Alexander would discover that the shadows he'd been running from, the guilt about his father, the sense that he could never do enough to make up for failing to save him, began to fade in the light of the family he and Amelia built together. Their daughter was born in February, a healthy baby girl they named Catherine after the judge who'd granted Amelia's restraining order. 2 years later, they had a son, whom they named after Alexander's father. They never forgot where they'd started. Every year on the anniversary of the night they'd met, they went back to the Grandview Hotel. They'd have dinner at the restaurant, take a walk around the lobby, remember the moment their lives had intersected and changed forever. "Do you ever regret it?" Amelia asked him on their 5th anniversary, as they stood in almost the exact spot where Alexander had first approached her. Taking the risk? Helping a stranger? Alexander looked at his wife, his real wife, the mother of his children, his partner in everything that mattered, and smiled. "Not for a single second. You were the best risk I ever took." "Even though it was complicated?" Amelia teased. "Even though it nearly got you killed a few times?" "Especially because of that," Alexander said. "The things worth having are never simple. They're messy and scary and require courage. But they're worth it. You're worth it. This life we've built, it's worth every moment of danger, every complication, every risk." Amelia kissed him, there in the lobby where their story had begun. And as they walked out into the Chicago night, hand in hand, they carried with them the knowledge that love, real, honest, hard-won love, was the most powerful force in the world, strong enough to overcome fear, strong enough to defeat evil, strong enough to transform two broken people into something whole and beautiful and real. But there was one more secret, one final revelation that came. Years later, on a quiet evening when their children were asleep, and Amelia and Alexander were sitting in their library, sipping wine and talking the way they still did after all these years. "I need to tell you something," Alexander said, his voice serious enough that Amelia set down her glass and gave him her full attention. "About that night we met. About why I really helped you." "I thought you helped me because you saw I was in trouble," Amelia said, a thread of worry creeping into her voice. "Was there something else?" Alexander took a deep breath. "The day before I saw you in that hotel lobby, I got a phone call from a woman I'd represented years ago when I was first starting out. She'd been in a situation similar to yours, trapped in an abusive relationship, connected to a criminal organization, terrified to leave. I'd helped her escape, got her into witness protection, testified at her trial. She'd been safe for years." He paused, pain crossing his face. "But her ex-husband found her, tracked her down despite all the protection, all the new identity. He killed her and her new husband, and their 2 children. Murdered them all in their home." Alexander's voice cracked. "I got the call the day before I saw you. I was at that hotel having a drink, trying to process the fact that I'd failed to protect someone I'd promised to keep safe. And then you walked in, and I saw in you everything I'd failed to save in her." Amelia was crying now. "Alexander, I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad," Alexander continued. "I'm telling you because you asked me once why I helped you, and I told you it was because I choose the right path. That was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth is that I helped you because I needed to save someone. I needed to prove to myself that not everyone I tried to protect would end up dead, that I could actually make a difference. So I was, what? A way for you to assuage your guilt?" Amelia asked, though there was more curiosity than anger in her voice. "At first, maybe," Alexander admitted. "But Amelia, somewhere between that hotel lobby and the moment I actually got to know you, it stopped being about saving you and started being about you. about who you are, about the incredible person I was privileged to meet and help and eventually love. You weren't a stand-in for someone else. You were never that. You were Amelia, brave and kind and strong and everything I didn't know I'd been looking for. Amelia was quiet for a long moment, processing this new information. Finally, she said, "Thank you for telling me, for being honest, even though it's complicated." "Are you angry?" Alexander asked. "No," Amelia said slowly. "I'm sad for that woman and her family. I'm sad that you've carried that guilt for so long. But I'm not angry that helping me was also about healing yourself. I think—" She paused, considering. "I think maybe that's how real connection works. We help each other for complicated reasons. We save each other while saving ourselves. And that doesn't make the help less real or the love less true. It just makes us human." Alexander pulled her close, overwhelmed with gratitude for this woman who understood him so completely. "How did I get so lucky?" he whispered. "We both got lucky," Amelia corrected. "We found each other at exactly the right moment, when we both needed saving, when we both needed hope, when we both needed to believe that people could be good and love could be real and broken things could be made whole." They sat together in the quiet of their library, surrounded by books and memories and the life they'd built together. And they understood, finally and completely, that their story, messy and complicated, and born from danger and deception, was still a love story. Perhaps the best kind of love story. The kind where two people chose each other despite everything, where they fought for each other and healed each other and became better together than they ever could have been apart. Years later, when their children asked how Mom and Dad met, Amelia would always smile and say, "Your father saw me when I needed someone to see me, and I saw him right back, and we decided that was worth everything." It was a simple version of a complicated truth. But then, the best truths usually were.